opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. My name is Dawn Richardson, and it's New Year's Eve. I want to wish everyone a very happy and healthy new year. You are all so special to us, especially those of us who advocate for change in health policy and law, because your commitment to the education we provide makes things so much better. We have a very special treat for you today. 3 awesome talks from CHD's Moment of Truth conference held in Austin, Texas in early November. These are must-see conference talks. Each one of them is so important. We're going to start off today with Dr. Suzanne Humphries, Deadly Secrets and Monkey Business, on whose shoulders do we stand? And then we're going to move on to Gavin De Becker. He's New York Times best-selling author, and he is presenting forbidden facts from his book that just recently came out and is awesome. And then we have yours truly, myself, Dawn Richardson, to talk about the National Vaccine Information Center, where I work as the Director of Advocacy, and I talk about the incredible importance of how you can make a difference with election primaries because of their importance on getting medical freedom legislation passed and bad bills stopped. We have so much to look forward to in the new year, and we appreciate each and every one of you. Happy New Year, and enjoy.
For those of you who don't know, I am a kidney specialist, and I've dealt with serious forms of kidney dysfunction in my career, often using very toxic drugs that are akin to chemotherapeutic drugs. And over the years, I've discovered that many kidney diseases could have been avoided because they're caused or worsened by vaccination. And some kidney injury appears rather quickly, like what I saw in 2009 when flu shots were given in my hospital to just about anybody with a heartbeat. But there are slower forms of kidney damage, and it turns out that a monkey virus DNA can commonly be detected in diseased sections of human kidney biopsies. In particular, a very common and difficult to treat disease called focal end segmental glomerulosclerosis, FSGS, something that I struggled with year after year in my patients. But in 2009, when I woke up to the vaccination issue, whenever I challenged the use of any flu vaccine given to a patient, no matter how sick they were, even before a clinical diagnosis had been made, the powers that were, and even my peers in the hospital, responded with, "What about polio?" So I decided to look into the "what about polio" question, and I discovered a much bigger story than I could have ever imagined. First off, for some bizarre reason, monkey kidneys in particular, were chosen as the cell type to pass poliovirus through with the intention to mutate it. Monkey kidneys are also used to mass produce the polio vaccine. Poliovirus grows very well in kidney cells, but it turns out that a lot of other, even more dangerous agents grow very well in kidney cells. Nonetheless, millions of monkeys were slaughtered for their kidneys, and the repercussions from using monkey cells to make human injectables have changed humanity forever. It was well established in 1962 that the same contaminating virus, which I'll talk about in a minute, which got into humans through the Salk polio vaccines, causes cancer in human kidney cells. Harvey Schein and John Enders, who were very famous vaccinologists, they wrote these articles, and those articles were shelved, and the subject was not explored any further in mainstream science. Feel free to take pictures of any of my slides, use them, research what I say, fact check me. There we go. Okay, but anywhere you look, just like this chart here, you'll see that kidney cancer rates rose significantly after 1975, 20 years after the mass injections, and they have continued to rise. And even Grok will agree with that. So the only study ever set up to follow recipients of contaminated polio vaccines to assess these cancers was terminated right at the time that the cancers would have begun to show up, 19 years later. And historically, the mass production of viral vaccines like polio vaccines has relied on many animal cell lines, all of which could have harbored dangerous viruses. These virus contaminants are called adventitious agents. The cell line I'm concentrating on today are monkey kidney cells, though monkey testicle cells were also used in research and vaccine production. In 1959, a cancerous agent was identified in polio vaccine culture medium, which was later named simian virus 40 or SV40. You might have heard about that already today. The name was given to it in 1961, but in the decades to follow, dozens more contaminating monkey viruses were identified. And there's no shortage of published research on adventitious contaminants in all animal cell culture media and other enzymes and biologicals that are used in vaccine productions. I happen to own these two books here, but you can actually read them online because there's this fellow named Nick Pitosky, and I put his link there that you can refer to, and you can follow him on X. He posts some pretty astounding stuff. Many primate labs throughout the USA, UK, and elsewhere from the 1960s onwards specifically studied SV40's ability to break the species barrier for transmission, and SV40's ability to combine with other viruses and DNA. Today, SV40 is also part of the plasmid that's used in many gene therapies. In the 1960s, SV40 was weaponized in secret labs within the USA to be used as a bioweapon. Yeah. This Venn diagram I created, trying to get it all straight in my own head, includes overlapping relationships. Take a picture of this one. So the relationships are between the polio vaccine, SV40, and other adventitious agents up to today's COVID jab. And you will later see why I included HIV in there, as it has overlaps with monkeys, COVID jabs, and spike. So between 1955 and 2025 lies a covert laboratory manipulation of SV40 and other passenger monkey viruses. And if you've never put the dots together for yourself, what you're about to hear might feel a bit like the map you're looking at there. Sick animals have always been used for vaccine production. This image from our book, Dissolving Illusions, shows the different types of pus that was mixed back and forth between animals and humans and back again. And it includes horse, mule, pig, cow, buffalo, rabbit, sheep, goat, human baby, human cadaver, are all among the species that are used to create and propagate the smallpox vaccines worldwide, resulting in transmission of viruses, bacteria, and fungus from one animal species to another and back into humans. And they called it pure lymph at the time. And the Chinese used monkeys for their smallpox vaccine production in 1926, which they named, of all things, the Temple of Heaven strain. The smallpox vaccine was the first to transgress nature's built-in protective biologic barrier against interspecies transmission of disease. But smallpox vaccines, as bad as they were, only punctured into the skin. After the invention of the hypodermic needle, injections were developed to penetrate into muscle, and everything changed. In 1957, when scientists realized there was a tumor-causing agent in the polio vaccine, accidental interspecies transfer and consequences was of some concern. But a higher priority was stopping the public from learning about it. Some scientists believed that the public had a right to know, and they sacrificed greatly to get knowledge to us. These three people will never have hospitals or institutions named after them because history is so often mythologized and recorded by the ruthless victors. My presentation today is dedicated to these three heroes who went through horrible professional and personal pain. Because of them, we know for certain that since at least 1955, the US government was deceiving the public and injecting the masses with unsafe and ineffective vaccines. And I want to discuss Dr. Eddy and Dr. Morris first, and then I'll introduce Judith Vary Baker later in the talk. After Dr. Eddy reported a cancer-causing agent in the Salk polio vaccine in 1959 while working at the Division of Biologics Standards, which was rebranded FDA in 1972, she was immediately silenced, gaslit, and many attempts were made to thwart her and her publications. Dr. Morris, also from DBS, was tasked with evaluating vaccines for safety and efficacy even before the 1950s. He clashed with his superiors about ongoing lack of efficacy results within the influenza vaccine, and later spoke about real problems with polio, measles, and adenovirus vaccines. and in 1976 was the key FDA whistleblower about the swine flu vaccine's danger and lack of necessity, which got him fired. In the 50s and 60s, Dr. Morris worked on the same floor with Dr. Eddy, and he gave her much-needed moral support and published medical articles with her on SV40. Both Eddy and Morris had their careers destroyed because they believed the public had a right to know the potential dangers that were discovered in vaccines. Every time Eddy and Morris spoke up publicly, they would arrive back to work to find the locks on their labs changed, their lab animals killed, lab records confiscated, and they were moved to another division, or in Dr. Morris's case, ultimately fired. Greg Delaney and Dr. Stephen Hatfield, recently fired from HHS for opposing the mRNA technology, should know that this has always been the normal method for removing sinners from the church of vaccination. Sorry, I didn't go down. I lost my place there. There we go. Okay, there we go. In 1969, Dr. Bernice Eddy's polyomavirus monograph on SV40 was published. I think this monograph was her way of planting her flag, even after being demoted, isolated, shunned, bribed, told to go on a prolonged holiday, and ultimately pushed out. The person at the bottom is Dr. Sarah Stewart, who worked with Dr. Eddy, and they worked together to identify polyoma, tumor-inducing viruses, in the polio vaccine. Polyoma means many tumors, for those of you that don't know. And back in the 1950s and 60s, regulatory capture by vaccine manufacturers and Rockefeller entities was already deeply entrenched. During a 1972 Senate hearing, S-3419, Dr. Isaacson was asked about 32 worthless vaccines he had brought to the attention of the General Accounting Office. The use of these vaccines had gone on for 20 years, with astronomical profits to the manufacturers. This long list, take a picture of this one. You're going to want to look back on some of these names. This long list cannot possibly have been clean with zero adventitious pathogens in them. We have no idea how far and wide these dangerous and ineffective concoctions were administered over 2 decades. But why was there a 1972 Senate hearing in the first place? Well, it was to bring to the Senate's attention the dysfunction of the Division of Biologic Standards caused from regulatory capture by the vaccine industry and powerful entities, which allowed these worthless vaccines to exist, and also to detail the appalling treatment of Drs. Eddy and Morris when they tried to expose problems. Dr. Morris backed Dr. Eddy and hired attorney Jim Turner in both their defenses. The 1950s was also a time of escalation of the Cold War between USA and Russia, with Cuba as the battleground. Eisenhower authorized an invasion of Cuba in 1960. USA agents trained and armed thousands of anti-Castro Cubans to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. But the incoming president, John F. Kennedy, knowing that Russia supported Cuba, refused to supply the necessary air support for the coup, and instead brokered a backdoor deal with Khrushchev via his brother Robert Kennedy in order to prevent a retaliative nuclear war with Russia. Because of the withdrawal of that air support, most of the anti-Castro Cubans on the mission were captured, tortured, and slaughtered by Castro's militia in a disaster you may have heard of called the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy's generals and the military were incensed with him for not helping the Cubans try to topple Castro. He was branded as being soft on communism. New Orleans was also a popular destination for wealthy Latin Americans and heads of state in need of medical treatment, which gave the CIA plenty of information via spying and directly from medical informants. Many South American and Cuban doctors were trained by Dr. Alton Ochsner, an internationally renowned cardiothoracic surgeon and researcher and head of the National Cancer Institute. His hands also reached into the top tiers of clandestine government operations, and he rubbed elbows with billionaires and USA celebrities. After the Bay of Pigs incident, Cuban doctors were sent to train in Russia instead of going to Ochsner, which angered him greatly. Because of Castro's takeover, the mafia lost their nightclubs, brothels, and gambling houses in Cuba, and JFK gained a lot of dangerous haters. Ochsner, who had plenty of mob connections, also hated Kennedy with a passion. The political Cold War was playing out in diverse secret projects on the medical and bioweapons warfare front. The Pentagon and/or CIA and FBI sought out scientists and doctors to help work on different operations or projects, which brings me to the third person I would like to honor. Judith Barry Baker. She came to national attention. Oh, you'll have your chance, don't worry. She came to national attention in over 100 newspaper articles in the 1950s as a high school whiz kid. With an IQ over 185, she piled up state and national awards in art, sculpture, and science. She was spotted by Dr. Alton Ochsner at the age of 16 while undertaking her own cancer research at home with a tumorous goldfish. Her grandmother died of cancer, which made her passionately want to work on cancer cures. But under Ochsner's direction, Judith was later mentored in her high school laboratories by a team of doctors and scientists. But she had no idea that she was being encouraged, watched, and trained by CIA's eugenicist medical masterminds. The fact that her scientific reports were sent to a combat research and biological warfare center in Fort Detrick meant nothing to her at the time. A very important reason they were mentoring her was that as an inventor, by the age of 18, Judith had solved several problems in cancer research that eminent scientists couldn't. At the age of 19, Ochsner invited Judith to a summer internship in surgeon and nuclear scientist Dr. Mary Sherman's laboratory. Judith was beyond thrilled to be working with this world-class doctor. The stated reason for her invitation was to assist in a 1963 project that Ochsner was supervising. The project, termed Get Castro, involved irradiating SV40-induced cancer cells, which accelerated tumor aggressiveness. But Ochsner's team had hit a brick wall. Judith's ability to solve problems and to induce cancer in mice in just 1 week in her high school, as well as to speed read medical information even in other languages, made her an essential member of the team. Ochsner was the supervisor along with Dr. Mary Sherman. David Ferry was a bright and multi-talented pilot, military man, and a social outcast who also worked for the mafia. 23-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald was a highly intelligent international double agent and military operative with numerous abilities and talents. One of his assignments was to protect Judith. There were many other contributing parties who only communicated on a need-to-know basis. The project also involved individuals from more than one medical university, the National Cancer Institute, the NIH, MD Anderson, DARPA, and the DBS. Key controllers were the CIA and FBI. When Judith arrived in New Orleans for her internship, Ochsner told her that she was selected in part for her ability to work in unusual conditions and that her participation was to be off the records. The project was secret, and the makeshift laboratory she worked in alongside a mouse house were primitive and dangerous. Ochsner sweetened the deal with a promise to fast-track her into Tulane Medical School, all expenses paid, with a stipend. It was a dream come true. Judith's job was to extract and process tumor samples and also keep the cells growing in tissue culture using a growth medium, which she helped develop during a 1961 internship at Roswell Park Research Institute under the esteemed Dr. George Moore. In New Orleans in 1963, samples were taken by Lee Oswald to Dr. Mary Sherman to be exposed to radiation in a secret linear particle accelerator that was 3 stories tall. Radiation mutated and charged up the cancer cells. Then the cancer cells were injected into a new set of animals that had received ordinary X-ray radiation, which suppressed their immunity so the cancer could grow faster. The project involved transferring the most mutated and aggressive SV40 cancer cells from mice into primates, then to humans, but only after the cancer cells had achieved maximum killing capacity was it used on humans. Near the end of the Get Castro project, just when Oswald was to hand-deliver the cells to a sympathetic Cuban doctor within Cuba, the plan was abruptly terminated, which meant everyone involved was a risk to the project's secrecy, the intent which had far-reaching consequences. The bioweapon was ordered from on high to be handed to MD Anderson and was couriered there by Lee Oswald. By then, he knew his life was at risk. The promised fast track into Tulane Medical School never eventuated for Judith because she did something nobody else dared to do. She stood up to the tyrant, Ochsner, and protested over the lies she was told about the human volunteer that she was assigned to transfer cancer cells into. She was led to believe that he already had cancer and had agreed to the experiment so he could be released from prison early. Judith discovered that he didn't have cancer at all until it was given to him by her. Ochsner was furious that this young upstart challenged him and in the process outed the secret project to his office staff and coworkers. Ochsner retracted his promise during a verbal attack for which Judith was lucky to leave the building with her teeth. Were it not for mafia godfather Carlos Marcello's top man in prison, next on the list of so-called volunteers, being saved by her expose of the truth, she may very well have perished. But Marcello had someone trailing Judith to protect her. Before Dr. Sherman, David Ferry, and Lee Oswald were all murdered, Judith was warned by them of what would happen if she talked any further. Knowing that Ochsner and CIA were dangerous entities, she resigned herself to the loss of her dream and quietly left the scene for over 20 years. I'm having trouble with my computer, okay. In these two amazing books you see here, Judith describes everyone's roles in great detail and explains the reasons why she later decided to go public and tell her experience. The minutiae is fascinating, and these books lay it all out with documentation for her claims. Ed Haslam, author of a 2007 book called Dr. Mary's Monkey, grew up in New Orleans. Haslam's father was a doctor at Tulane University Hospital who knew Dr. Ochsner. Ed remembered Dr. Mary from a social visit to his house when he was a young child. Dr. Sherman's mysterious murder in July 1964, when he was around 12 years old, haunted him even into his adulthood. On his deathbed, Ed's father firmly told him to stay away from the issue because if pursued, Ed would be upsetting the most powerful entities on the planet. But he investigated it anyway. His chronicle of the situation centers on Dr. Mary Sherman's murder, but also reveals poignant and well-researched portrayals of all the other people involved in the plot to kill Castro using mutated cancer cells and radiation. Chapter 11, called The Machine, details the secrecy level of the project and describes the workings of a high-powered linear particle accelerator used on cancer cells, which required 5 million volts of electricity to operate. It was hidden in downtown New Orleans in a 3-story infectious disease laboratory of the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital, behind high walls and guarded by soldiers with machine guns. Haslam describes how Mary Sherman was killed in the linear particle accelerator and how her remaining body was transported quietly in the night to her apartment, where a failed attempt to set her on fire was undertaken. The crime scene was seemingly set up with her house alarm turned off, no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints to be found. The press was told what to say and what not to say, and J. Edgar Hoover made sure that they complied. Her killers were never found. Judith's book, along with Ed Haslam's book, explain why Lee Oswald was set up by the CIA to take the blame for killing President Kennedy. I suspect that Oswald was killed to silence him from ever talking about the SV-40 project, which he was intimately involved in. But worse still, Oswald's childhood friend, Jack Ruby, who loved Lee and also knew about the project, was forced by CIA to kill Oswald. Ruby was later killed by prison doctors using the cancer cell bioweapon and X-rays before he could expose everything in his own public trial. Haslam and Judith detail a bioweapons research history which everyone should know. But one important question is, what happened to the bioweapon? Right, yeah. A 2017 FOIA document reprinted in Judith's book shows that the CIA and MD Anderson were contracted to continue working with this bioweapon up to and possibly well beyond 1967. Where any material went from there, I don't exactly know. I don't think I really want to know, quite frankly. But by 1967, everyone within the original project, except Judith and Ochsner, had disappeared or been killed. And I understand that it was something like 160 people. Something makes me think this operation was more than just about getting Castro. Some unthinkable abuses of science took place. Ed Haslam was also aware that HIV-1 is a mutated form of simian immunodeficiency virus, SIV, and that retroviruses like SIV and Mason-Pfizer monkey virus are so small they would have been unfilterable in the 1960s. In Dr. Mary's Monkey, Haslam asked a haunting question. Could HIV-1 have arisen from a mutated SIV exposed to gain-of-function experiments in the 1960s? Yes. As Dr. Mary said to Judith, any number of original and mutated carcinogenic viruses could have been in the mix, and precisely what these mutated monkey viruses had become were unknown. In brief, please understand that viruses often work together, genetically recombining or synergistically assisting each other. SV40 is often referred to as a helper virus in virology literature for that reason. So, what do we know about other viruses that came along for the ride in polio vaccine? In 1991, Dr. Robert Bohannon did an exhaustive, well-controlled investigation on biopsy tissue and blood from a B-cell lymphoma in a person with AIDS. The result was an immunosuppressive type D retrovirus called Mason-Pfizer monkey virus. Yes, named after Pfizer, by the way, in the cancer, but not in any control subjects who had AIDS without cancer, nor in any control specimens. Even though Mason-Pfizer monkey virus causes AIDS in rhesus monkeys, Bohannon was extremely cautious in his conclusions. But Dr. Herbert Ratner, a former director of public health in Oak Park, Illinois, saw this report and gave Bohannon a sample of the 1955 Parke-Davis Salk polio vaccine from his deep freeze. And then Bohannon tested it. And the identical strain of the Mason-Pfizer monkey virus found in the cancer of the aforementioned patient was detected in the vaccine. In 1992, Bohannon's findings were published nationwide, but you won't find them anywhere today. I have copies of them. Given that Ochsner and Sherman got their original SV40 stock from the polio vaccine, could different strains of SV40 and other monkey viruses have also accumulated in the surviving primates from the Get Castro project? Which leads to the next question, which is what happened to those surviving monkeys from the Get Castro project? In August of 1963, after the cancer had surprisingly spread into the control monkeys, a decision was made to rewild all the surviving monkeys to Haiti, Congo, and Central Africa. Consider the potential ramifications of that. I think you just did consider the potential ramifications of that. It is well accepted in scientific circles that viruses have been transferred from wild monkeys to humans, but we're always told that it happens by monkey bites or by eating monkey meat. But consider this, the release of the surviving monkeys that had picked up God knows what in those gain-of-function labs back into the wild monkey colonies after they were rewilded could have thoroughly confused any future emerging picture of primate-associated diseases. Any future immune-suppressing or cancer-associated virus would not be blamed on the gain-of-function labs, even though they could have been generated there. The blame would go on the wild monkeys. After 1967, the trail went a bit quiet. But in 2006, Dr. Ralph Barrick, a world expert on gain-of-function viruses, in particular coronaviruses, published this interesting paper which prophesied the future. He said, there might suddenly arise a synthetically derived viral bioweapon in the form of a worldwide pandemic, which could inspire fear and terrorize the human population, with all governments working together to respond in what he called predicted ways. What might that bioweapon be, and how might the government respond? Sorry, I had to speed through that one. Barrick stated that various recombinant viruses such as coronavirus, HIV, and others have already been assembled using reverse genetics, designed with pathogenic traits for conducting effective biowarfare. He mentioned the importance of identifying viral genes that target the host's immune defense, and that having a gene repository with which to tinker around in the lab would be helpful in managing viral virulence. This laboratory playground is all for the good of the public, though, so don't worry, because they have to be able to save us in case there's a bio attack. Barrick's articles pretty much lead straight to SARS-CoV-2, spike composition, and the mRNA injections. A short time later, a 2010 Rockefeller document laid out a global lockstep program, which reads like a bedtime story for totalitarian youth. A master map where you lose your rights, all in the name of making you safer, with a government control roadmap that predicted 2020 to 2022. After the world was successfully saved by being propagandized, locked down, and mass injected, in 2023, Kevin McKernan, who's here with us this weekend, yay, found 4 DNA genetic sequences of SV40 from the plasmid used for mRNA production inside the most used brand of all COVID shots in the world. The SV40 DNA sequences enhance the E. coli plasmid to make more spike RNA for the vaccine manufacturers. Everything apart from the code for that spike mRNA was supposed to be removed from the vaccine that the public received, but it wasn't. 2 months ago, further testing of the updated Pfizer jabs by McKernan showed the SV40 to still be there, but get this, with a 2 times concentration in the pediatric formula. McKernan has given numerous references which show that the promoter and enhancer of SV40, just a couple of fragments, of the full virus code, can have significant DNA modulation all by themselves, specifically influencing a protein called P53, which programs your body to continually seek out and participate in deletion of mutant cells. It's a protein you want working in top condition. But the spike S2 subunit interacts with P53, thus disturbing healthy genomic stability and normal cancer surveillance. Even beyond this effect, spike can act like a biological cluster bomb. You see that HIV GP120? We also see 3 snake motifs and rabies G protein. Of what use are they? Well, Lentz, as you can see the article at the bottom, reported that in 1987, he reported that synthetic peptides of snake venom and rabies G protein bind to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. And those receptors are in the nervous system and muscles and also modulate heart function. Did anyone who made massive amounts of spike protein have neurologic or muscular problems or heart problems? All components in this spike combination have harmful effects with other properties, making it what is called a superantigen, meaning an agent that leads to massive cytokine release, which can result in the immune system killing the body that it's designed to protect. Did the GP120 protein just float around on a dandelion seed until it got stuck into the back of a pangolin, or where did it come from? Was Pradhan the first to be correct when he said in February 2020 in this preprint article that HIV-1 GP120 did not arrive by chance in SARS-CoV-2? Well, maybe, because within 6 days, Fauci personally saw to the article's retraction. Pradhan illustrated the precisely spaced HIV inserts in key sections of the spike, critical for cell attachment, entry, and immunological chaos. And he called it uncanny. But what other similarities might HIV GP120 have to SARS-CoV-2? There are so many common features between them. If you add this all up, along with a laundry list of spike problems that I've not even brought up, with plasmid remnants including SV40, what might the consequence of this gain-of-function engineered cluster bomb be? But here's the real sucker punch. Remember how SV40 knocks out P53, which is a cancer suppressor? This means that not only can the jab lead to increased cancer susceptibility, but SV40-associated cancer won't respond to chemotherapy. Conventional cancer treatments are likely to make SV40 cancer go wild because P53, which directs cancer cells to die off, is necessary for chemo, but especially for radiation to do its cellular killing and removal. The fact that radiation makes SV40 cancer far more aggressive and also suppresses the immune system is the whole reason it was used in the Get Castro gain-of-function project. So when you know all this, you have to ask the question, why was the public told that COVID shots would save their lives? 4 years later, when it's clear that the jabs don't prevent transmission, infection, hospitalization, or death, but did cause all sorts of serious medical conditions, why are we still being mandated or told to get it again and again? How come babies are getting numerous doses? What's in those injections that's so important to force it into every arm of every human on the planet? What's the real agenda? I've only mentioned one little needle in the haystack of vaccine corruption, okay? Only reason we know about these cracks in the dam is because of the few scientists who are willing to give up everything to tell us what they saw. How many other secret projects were there, and still are there to this day, that we won't ever hear about? Because maybe, just maybe, there are no surviving witnesses. When you see the same playbook being used repeatedly, you have to wonder if we were really ever protected by those entrusted with public health and medical research. The youngest generation today has been assaulted with more injected poison than any adult in this room. It would not be possible unless the so-called errors, mistakes, mishaps, and failed plans of the past were glossed over, buried, or forgiven time and again, collectively viewed as part of the learning curve of progress. One look at the health of children today shows you there has been no progress when it comes to vaccination. And knowing what I know now, I find it astonishing that vaccination has been upheld as a normal part of life. Okay, so what happened? Got one more slide at the end. Okay, it didn't come through. Okay, it's all right. So on the last slide, I have Dr. Bernice Eddy and I have Dr. Anthony Morris, and I can't honor them today. I can, but they're not here. But I'm not going to let the third person, I should call her Dr. Judith Barry Baker, leave this planet without being honored for what she has given up. She has been abused, she has been exiled, she has been beaten, she has been fed ground glass for dinner. This woman has been through it. She has been haunted and chased around the planet. And we are lucky enough to have her here today. And she will be at my book table with her books, and she loves to talk. So I hope that you can honor this beautiful woman with me, the most brave person I've ever known. And thank you for enjoying her with us today. Thank you, Judith. We love you.
More studies needed. Now, to be certain, because these are esteemed scientists, to be certain that more studies were actually needed, they did another review in 2006, and then one in 2008, and then one in 2010. They didn't want to skip 2012. They did that, 2014, and guess what? They all reached the same conclusion: more studies needed. Why so many studies? Because more bullshit works better than a little bullshit. Yeah. And finally, in 2018, the gloves came off, and this time the Institute of Medicine had a bold new idea, and that was to study the actual veterans who were injured. It's not a bad idea, but they hadn't done it for 22 years. So, after all that stalling and suppression, the famed Navy Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, he led an independent review of the Institute of Medicine report, and he testified before Congress about it. I'll read you his comment. Government and industry officials intentionally manipulated or withheld compelling evidence about the adverse health effects from Agent Orange. Now, his testimony was particularly important and even emotional because he is the person who ordered the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam, and his son was one of the soldiers who died from it. Now, why does Agent Orange matter to us? It's because people that we all talk to, and we're all in the business of trying to persuade people who are not easy to persuade, people that we talk to, if they can embrace what I just said, the idea that the government sometimes conceals and suppresses and lies, if truths that they don't want known, if people can accept that, they'll be more open to the possibility that it might happen again when the Institute of Medicine uses the same methods for the same money, paid by the same client, with the same experts, for the same reasons. And the only thing that differs is the toxin. And it happens again and again. To dissolve so many forbidden facts, it takes more than mere science. It takes a special time-tested method that the Institute of Medicine has perfected, and not just for Agent Orange. Cancer from baby powder, Gulf War syndrome, silicone implants, anthrax vaccine, burn pits, SIDS, all done with the Institute of Medicine method, all debunked. Now, a main message from me today is that when you can show people that the government does this and debunks truth and how they do it, how the sausage is made, then they are actually maybe a little bit open to assuming that vaccines are not so special. Vaccines are not alone in this process. I want to just take SIDS for a minute. SIDS is the umbrella term for deaths that cannot be explained. It is a method when, even after autopsy and case investigation, and sometimes, for God's sake, police investigation, the death is unexplained. So it is a category of death, not a cause of death. A baby cannot be diagnosed with SIDS, and SIDS cannot kill a baby. It's not a real thing. And yet, even though nobody knows what it is, and it's about specifically mysterious deaths, the Institute of Medicine was able to debunk the idea that any vaccine or combination of vaccines could possibly be the cause of these deaths, for which the cause of death could not be determined. That was one of their great studies. Here's baby powder real quickly. Johnson & Johnson sends a special delegation to D.C. to meet with the FDA, and they disclose voluntarily that there's a little bit of asbestos, cancer-causing asbestos, in their baby powder. And the FDA takes this very seriously and decides to study how much asbestos is okay in baby powder. Apparently, they never considered the number 0, which is what I would choose for my kid. So they studied it, and the next thing you know, 44 years have gone by. That's how the government does this game. Is extraordinary delay. Hey, we're working on it. Hey, we're spending millions of dollars on it. Hey, you can see all these committees working on it. Hey, they're just about to come out with their report. Why, look who's on this committee. And then another study, and another study, and another study. Now, the FDA finally has ruled favorably on asbestos in baby powder. That was last year. And it took them just 52 years to get there. 52 years of mothers having cancer from breathing in baby powder. We don't really know as much about the infants. By the way, anybody around can get me water. That'll keep me going for another 2 hours. Silicone breast implants. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Like she said, I didn't drink out of this like we're all good. I understand. I'm still not going to do it because you touched it and it could be COVID, so hold on. I'll put the COVID down there. So, silicone breast implants, another one of these things that the IOM saved us all from, because it turned out they were perfectly safe, even though 18,000 women had sued, even though Dow Corning had paid out $4 billion in settlements and court judgments. The IOM comes along and issues one of its pronouncements, and with a wave of their diplomas, they say silicone is perfectly healthy, and after that, no more lawsuits. Because when you get into court and you have the Institute of Medicine, you can't fight it. Because the Institute of Medicine, as we all know, has a great big building in D.C. and is important and all that stuff. Now I don't get to vaccines. And vaccines, I remind you, are in the context of these other things I've just shared. Because vaccines are just another area of deceit. It's not special. There are many of them. So federal officials and vaccine makers often say things like millions of people have taken vaccines and they're just fine, as if they did some door-to-door survey. They didn't, obviously. The issue, however, is not the millions. The issue is the few. That's what we do. For example, when an airplane crashes, we don't say, oh, well, most of the time they don't crash. We go and we do exhaustive, comprehensive explorations to find out exactly what happened. Now imagine if the airlines took the approach that pharma takes. A flight from New York to London goes down into the Atlantic about 20 minutes before getting to Heathrow, and everybody's killed. With pharma's approach, the airlines would tell the bereaved families that flight was 95% effective. And like the flu vaccine, they would say, well, they're better off than they were. They're far closer to London than they were when they were in New York. Or they'd say most of our flights make it the whole way without crashing. Now, we all know there are risks with commercial air travel, so I want to focus on that for a second. The annual fatality, oh, by the way, so most of us flew to get here, and we accept that obviously we know planes crash sometimes, but we're doing an assessment of the odds, and we're deciding that based on what we've experienced and seen in our own lives, that most of the time this is worth it. And I want to tell you, the actual annual fatality rate for air travel is currently around 17 deaths per billion passengers. A conservative fatality rate for mRNA vaccines is around 40,000 per billion injections. So, no surprise that not so many people are interested in getting these boosters. If you listen to the CDC, you would now be on booster 12. And what's interesting about that is that all those people that we occasionally find ourselves arguing with who insist that you are stupid and they are smart because they got their mRNA vaccine, guess what they don't do? They don't get the boosters either. They're not listening to the CDC any more than I am. The difference between them and me is that they might have gone 4 of these vaccines, and I decided to go with 0 of these vaccines. So, now back to autism for a moment. After too many reports from doctors and too many published papers and too many parents with their damn reports about things that happen to their babies, the government decided they finally had to do something. Now, the public was asked to believe that meant find out what causes autism. But what it actually meant was the opposite. The government decided to find out what doesn't cause autism. And there's nobody better at discovering what doesn't cause something than the Institute of Medicine. So fast forward, and everybody knows that any vaccine autism link has been debunked. And that's where we are today, debunked. And that word is interesting, debunked, because when you use it, you sound very smart. And when you oppose it, everybody thinks you're very dumb. I don't mean everybody, but many people think you're very dumb, or that you're anti-science, or that you're an anti-vaxxer, which is a pejorative. There's a very famous speech where John Kennedy says, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I am a Berliner, and the people cheer. I get to say today, "Ich bin anti-vaxxer." Now, having said that, there are actually some vaccine products I feel are better than others, or at least are a judgment call for parents to make. One of them would be the BCG vaccine. It actually has health benefits. It helps with other respiratory diseases, not just tuberculosis, which is what it's for. It's 100 years old. It's given in almost every country on earth, but it's not given in the United States. Go figure. Why? They might say, well, tuberculosis is rare, but how rare? It's 9,000 cases a year in the United States. You want to know what's rare? Tetanus. That's rare. The tetanus death rate for children in the United States is 1 death every 156 million people. In 10 years, there have been 14 tetanus deaths in the United States. They were all old people. Tetanus is really, really hard to get. You have to find it, not transmissible. Then you have to have the deep puncture wound. Then you have to not clean the deep puncture wound. And then you have to not get a tetanus vaccine when they are treating you in the hospital, which they give to you every time anyway. So there's just no argument for, as Dr. Paul said, no argument for the birthday vaccine of hepatitis B, and really no argument for tetanus unless you live in the Congo, because all over the world, the death rate for Texas is just about 0. No parent would let a stranger walk up to them on the street and inject their baby with some liquid they don't know, that they don't understand, that's a mystery. And yet millions of parents do exactly that every year at Rite Aid and Long's Drugs and Walgreens. They let a 23-year-old pharmacist assistant who may have been hired a week before, who didn't read any of the 12,000 words on the CDC website about cautions, decide on how much of this or that, not ask your kid any questions like, were you vaccinated last week and did you have a terrible adverse reaction, and inject your baby. Now, almost no Americans are aware of the ingredients in vaccines or the history. Many of you, of course, know some of what I'm going to share, but I'm putting it in a form that, and in the book I do as well, that you can hand to somebody else who you love or care about, or you're tired of, who you just want to persuade to maybe open their minds. For example, those parents that are going into all these pharmacies to get injections don't know that the smallpox vaccine was originally accomplished using pus scraped from the sores of an infected person, Or even better, they found they could get warm yellow-green pus scraped from the udder of a terribly infected cow. Now, infected cows actually became valuable because you could get that pus off of them and you could inject it into somebody or rub it into somebody's arm. Later, they combined human pus with cow pus. Sorry, I have to say pus so many times, by the way. I will stop. But they combined human pus with cow pus and horse pus because if there's one thing we know about pus, it's the more the merrier. Now, some of these old-timey vaccine ingredients, this is back then, were made by steeping them for years in a mix of ox bile, glycerin, and potato slices. I'm serious. Today, they would probably use French fries because, you know, science. Anyway, vaccinations evolved over time, this is back then, to include dried rabbit spinal cords, duck embryos, chicken blood, human bile, because you never want to waste that, ground up rat spleens, and boiled pig skin. Sounds crazy, but enough about the past. Let's acknowledge that science has come a long way since then, and here are some of the ingredients in today's modern vaccines. There's boiled pig skin again. Chicken embryo protein, blood from the hearts of cow fetuses, DNA fragments from human fetuses, oil extracted from the liver of sharks, and proteins from worm ovaries, and of course DNA fragments from monkey kidneys. There's a famous scene in Macbeth with the three witches are stirring the brew. Eye of newt, toe of frog, lizard's leg, tongue of dog. Can't you just picture Gates and Offutt and Hotez stirring that brew? But let's get back to the modern vaccine ingredients. Formaldehyde, God knows you want to inject that into a baby. Polysorbate 80, that's linked to infertility. Potassium chloride, this one is my favorite, potassium chloride, because that is the final ingredient that is given by executioners when they do lethal injections. Swear to God. Now, obviously, the vaccinators use much smaller doses than the executioners, but it does make the point that parents have no effing idea what is in these products. And another one is sodium borate, that's used in pesticides. It's not allowed in food, but apparently it's okay for babies. Triton X100, that's used in spermicides. And until very recently, ethyl mercury. Thank you, Bobby Kennedy Jr. And wasn't it really fun and crazy that the media and other people, when Bobby took the step of, and the ACIP committee took the step of removing mercury from childhood vaccines, they were whining like, don't take away our mercury from our babies. They were so upset about the idea just because Bobby did it. It wouldn't matter, of course, what he does. It's got to be bad news. Now, that book, Forbidden Facts, that I hope you all got today for, yeah, good. You have received it for no money, and I wrote it for no money, and our dear friend Tony Lyons is publishing it for no money, and it was really written just to give to that person I've described to you in your life, and or persons, you know them, and I think it has a chance of reaching some people. It has chapters about lots of government scams, and it weaves vaccines into that context. The part of the book that I found most enjoyable, and trust me, a lot of it was not enjoyable. It will make you really angry and piss you off, and a couple of pages later, you'll be laughing at something, because the part I found so enjoyable was learning the IOM process from the inside. How did they debunk the vaccine autism link? So a lot of it was done in closed-door meetings. So picture this. As we entered their closed session, you don't need any scientific or medical expertise to understand the opening remarks by the study director. First was her optimistic pronouncement. She said, "Closed session transcripts will never be shared with anybody outside the committee and the staff." Well, oh man, did that turn out to be wrong, because some good-hearted person took the transcripts and leaked them, and that's how so many of them are in this book. Her second pronouncement, however, yeah, I wish I knew who it was. We'd be giving that person a big hug. Her second pronouncement, however, was dead on accurate. The point of no return, the line we will not cross in public policy, is pull the vaccine or change the schedule. We wouldn't say compensate the injured, and we wouldn't say stop the program. The next speaker to get up hardened that cement. CDC wants us to declare, well, these things are pretty safe on a population basis, and we are not ever going to come down that autism is a true side effect. So that's that then. It's day one, hour one, and no matter what they might learn over their many well-paid months, they had already identified the line they would not cross. Then their real work started, which was how to artfully say what they knew they had to say without while artfully avoiding what they could not say. And it is now, I swear to you, it is like a Broadway comedy from this point on to hear these people talking and engaging nothing about science and everything about words. It starts with Dr. Wilson, who asked a crazy question at the beginning. Are we going to look at thimerosal? And Dr. McCormick answered fast and said, no, not this round. And Dr. Wilson said, wait a second, not this round. If we're going to look at autism, can we really fundamentally look at them in isolation? In the real world, these injections don't occur in isolation. Individuals that get MMR also receive vaccines with thimerosal. And he was so right. And it never came up again over 2 years, that topic. It most of all didn't come up because he was interrupted by Dr. Berg, who's my favorite, and he interrupted that important discussion to address his own deep concern. I don't know how long it will take us to figure out what the question is. I'm a veteran of another panel that took 6 days for a group about this large to figure out what the question was. It can be a formidable issue to figure out what the question is. I don't know what the question is, whether it is MMR or whether it is measles vaccine. And somebody tried to interrupt, but he was stuck. Excuse me, we're going to have a method for how we focus on the question. This is one of the questions we need to focus on. How are we going to form the question? What process are we going to use to focus the question? The issue of specifying the question is an important step. I would like to know how this panel is going to specify the question. That's day one. Now, another big fancy expert doctor was Dr. Goodman, and this guy was always willing to lay out his opinion very decisively and very clearly in a way that made it impossible to ever understand. Here's Dr. Goodman. In the end, the bottom line is, the only verdict that is of importance, is whether we say a causal relationship between vaccines and autism is likely, or suggested, or unlikely, or inadequate. That is the only metric. As soon as we start introducing other words, that sort of sidestep to causality, I don't think we're going to do that. I think we introduce confusion. Of course, introducing confusion was the whole idea. That's what he was hired for. Dr. Goodman continues, we can decide to subdivide the suggestive category into high suggestive and low suggestive, which I don't think we should, and I don't think we should start using words like association, which, first of all, it's a highly technical term, and it's guaranteed to be misunderstood if you are using it as a non-technical term for non-causality. Make sense? So he then says that the word association, quote, actually hides the fact that we are not making a judgment, that we are making a judgment that it is not causal. So those words, we are making a judgment that vaccines do not cause autism, were spoken on day one of this big theatrical production that they called science. Occasionally, one of the experts would say something absolutely crazy, by which I mean accurate. One said, quote, if we were a group working for Philip Morris, we'd be saying there's no relation between cancer and smoking. And that was certainly true. Dr. Goodman, however, interrupted, and he bragged, hey, we can parse it any way we want. And then he did a few laps around the parsing track. He said, if we want to subdivide, and oh man, did they want to subdivide, and I think we have to use, quote, there seems to be a strong association which we can't explain, or we don't have any other explanation for it, or we don't want to make a causal claim because we know from many observational studies, blah, 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 and we are not going to put it in the sufficient category in spite of all the observational evidence. Now, Dr. Goodman had just described what they supposedly knew from observational studies using the word blah, 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 blah. And in case 5 blahs didn't make it vague enough, he then followed up with his main point. We can decide on whatever standard we are going to use. Remember, behind closed doors, nobody's ever going to hear this. He's telling the truth. They can do it any way they want. And so they did. Dr. McCormick interjected, I don't want the word association. And then a race began between all these experts to see who could come up with the best categories without using the word association. Dr. Stato, he said that he had the best idea. He said, let's take the top category from vaccines, and then the second category from Agent Orange, and then in between the top from Agent Orange and the second from vaccines. Voila. They had solved their problem, but Dr. Johnson didn't like it, unfortunately. So, of course, this is scientific debate, so they go at it. He says, I don't think the way Agent Orange did it is the right way to go with vaccines. And I thought parents would really appreciate his distinction, one chemical having harmed a lot of children, and the other chemical having harmed a lot of children. But Dr. Johnson had a big idea, and he expressed it as if he were Hamlet. Inadequate to accept or reject. That is a statement. And I agree with him, that is a statement. Then there was a woman named Barbara Lowe Fisher. And I send her a big hug. She's not here today. But she was a problem for these folks because she made an offer to come and provide some information, and they rejected the offer. At one point, Dr. Stratton warned that they should not consider any information that had been offered by that woman, Barbara Lowe Fisher, because, listen to this, all we are going to get from her is a list of hundreds and hundreds of kids who were developing normally, but they got their MMR, and then they started to regress. In other words, all we're going to get from her is exactly what we're here to be doing. And Dr. Shaywitz then steps up to create the range of possible conclusions that they might meet. He says, you have, yes, there is a cause. No, there is not a cause. Maybe there is a cause. Maybe there is not a cause. And more likely, there is not a cause than a cause. Or more likely, a cause, then you have right in the middle, which is it's inadequate. At least we have maybe, more likely a cause, less likely a cause, and more likely not a cause. At least they had that. Now, to finish off his list, that doctor said, or vice versa. In other words, if it would serve science more to completely reverse things, they'd go with that. Now, Dr. Goodman liked the plan that he just heard. He said, I think that is the right number of categories. Now, I read the thing 30 times. I don't even know how many categories they're talking about, but he thought they'd found the right category. He said, whether we use these exact words or not, that we can debate. And debate they did. Debate words. Debate science, not so much. At one point, people in the room could sense that Dr. Goodman was processing something, and he was possessed in some way. Something big was coming. And so he warned his peers. He said, this is still sort of rough. And then he rolled out his big new invention. I call this the 3-category system. That is high, intermediate, and inadequate, with 2 other categories being no evidence at all or favors acceptance. A hush fell over the room as he continued. Do we want to use the word establish, which is a very high bar? And then Dr. Stratton rescued them all from that high bar when she said, I think that actually you don't have to agonize over it, not to prejudice your decisions over the next 3 years, while prejudicing their decisions over the next 3 years. She said, I will bet you $100 that you will never come up with a category 5, meaning vaccines are linked to autism, and it will never even cross your mind, she said. And right she was. It never even did cross their minds. Now, Dr. Goodman got hit by another lightning bolt of scientific inspiration and suggested that the group start searching for something. You got to listen to this. We should search for an argument that is embedded inside the rhetoric, an argument that might be of some value to parse out and take pieces of and make sure we address it in its pieces. Now, that mess of Scrabble tiles apparently made some sense to Dr. Stratton, who promised that when they reconvened, they would start dissecting every one of those ideas. But now, they had to adjourn a bit early because they needed a big break. They had been doing a lot of dissecting and parsing and dividing and subdividing, and you know how that really kicks your ass, and so they took a few months off. When they got back, in the meantime, the not funny part is, of course, babies are getting injected with the whole slew of vaccines. When they got back, Dr. Shaywitz had an interesting idea. He said, we can assume that we can tell parents by saying it might happen 1 in a million times. We can't rule that out. If it's a problem at all, it probably doesn't occur more than 1 time in 1,000, or 1 time in 10,000, or something like that. So in that one paragraph, this guy had just changed the odds by 1,000-fold, 1 in a million to 1 in 1,000, without even using a calculator. What a genius. And he continues, we're talking about human communication to people with various levels, various ethnic and cultural groups, various abilities to understand probability and scientific information, and that's not easy. And I thought, oh, these pesky Americans with their various ethnic groups and their various abilities to understand science. So Dr. Genius Professor Shaywitz then continues, we've got a dragon by the tail here, and at the end of the line we know, and I agree, this is great because he's agreeing with himself, and I agree that the more negative our presentation, the less likely people are to use vaccination. So this was their issue, right? If they came out with anything truthful about anything, that's still the issue, then people will perhaps be vaccine hesitant. And vaccine hesitancy is the #1 thing the government fears. Vaccine hesitancy, and we know what causes it, by the way, reality. So near the end, Dr. Bayer opened up Pandora's box of semantics to see if maybe they could just redefine the word that was giving them so much trouble. The word safe is interesting, he said. Safe is not a scientific term. Safe is a social judgment. Safe is compared to what, we have to ask. When you build a bridge, you build in a safety factor, knowing that you could always make it safer if you spent more or you did more. Now, to most Americans, asking if a product is safe to inject into your baby uses the regular old definition we've always grown up with, not exposed to danger or harm. You know, safe. But to the IOM and its rich Uncle Sam, safe means whatever they want it to mean, just like vaccine means whatever they want it to mean, just like autism means whatever they want it to mean. Visit the autism Wikipedia page, and you'll see a 12,000-word article, 400 citations that do not explain what autism is. This extraordinary range, the spectrum, of course. Now, near the very end of their impressive scientific journey, one IOM expert, who'd mostly been quiet, spoke up, and she said, while we are firm on our conclusions, based on the evidence, there are other issues that others may consider. So let's make it real clear that we are not wavering on our conclusions, based on the evidence, because we do not want to give the impression that we do not understand the complexities of autism, and we do not want to give the impression that we don't have all the answers. Of course, they didn't need all the answers. They had been hired to provide just one answer, and that's the one they did. I'm done with all that, and I want to tell you, I am a criminologist. That is my predominant work. And I look at these rather terrible scams every day, but done by governments all over the world, and it can at times make me pessimistic and sad and angry. And the one thing that gives me optimism and even joy is you. It is CHD, but it is also this community of people that while we all lost those 4 over there, we gained 4 over here who are deep relationships. Any one of us in our lives showed up, at somebody's house and knocks on the door and says, I'm in trouble, you'd all open the door. And these relationships are profound and important. And while I wouldn't, curse the world with COVID to get there, I am so grateful that we are there and so proud to be part of what you do. And thank you very much.
Sometimes Sometimes people get confused with the name National Vaccine Information Center. I've been called a shill for pharma and everything else. Absolutely not. We support the prohibition and removal of all vaccine mandates and the prohibition of vaccine status discrimination. Please, I want to encourage everybody, please go to nvicadvocacy.org on your phones some point today. Register for the portal because we have state pages where you can see every single bill that's vaccine related in your state. We track it, we issue positions, we give you talking points, we tell you where it is in the legislative process from the start to the finish and who you should be talking to, their contact information. All the information is there, so please use us as a resource. We are at a critical point and have an incredible opportunity to change things for the better for generations to come. But it's going to take work. I'm not going to lie. We're going to have to work. Election primaries are coming very soon. Late winter, early spring, right around the corner. And the most important message I want to share to all of you, each and every one of you has the ability to make a difference and change things in your state. But you need to take on the goal of making sure the best possible candidates are on the ballot in November of 2026. And I know that sounds far off, but it's not. All the work is happening right now before the primaries. You can have the absolute best bills filed in the legislature, but if you don't have good legislators in office, they're not going to listen to your talking points. They're not going to listen to your stories. And as well, if you don't have good legislators in there, the bad bills are going to pass. Just talk to the people in the states like California and New York and Maine and Connecticut that lost exemptions. So here's what's at stake. I want to give you some numbers. Here's what's at stake for the 2026 election. On the federal level, all 435 districts in the U.S. House of Representatives and 33 seats in the U.S. Senate are up for election. For state executive offices, 36 governor seats, 30 lieutenant governor seats, 30 attorney general seats, and 26 secretary of state seats are all up. And at the state legislative level, we have all 50 states. Out of all 50 states, there are 99 legislative chambers. If there's anybody from Nebraska in here, you only have one, you have a Senate, but everybody else has 2 chambers. And of those 46 states, 88 of these chambers are holding regular legislative elections in 2026. The general election is going to be November 3rd. The problem is the candidates that get on the ballot for November are not always the best choices. Well-funded candidates from organizations opposing the positions we personally take on for health policy have a huge advantage, but the good news is we have the power to change that. Here's what I'd like to do personally before the primary election in my state, and it would be great if you could do the same. I go to my Secretary of State website and I look up the candidates running. Now, you can also use a nonprofit called Ballotpedia, but you can call your Secretary of State or go to the website. I find the candidates that I am eligible to vote for, and when you contact them, this is the time they want to hear from you because they want your vote. Tell them what's important to you and ask them their positions on these issues. Then you can help the best one that you find. You can do block walks, you can put up a yard sign, you can make calls, you can even do some donations, you could have a coffee in your house. Help the best candidate overcome the pharma money, the medical trade money going to their opponents. You want to make sure to get the best people in there. And then once the general election comes, if you get them on your primary, then you can help them then too. So if you don't have any good candidates, consider running yourself. I know we have some candidates in here that did just that. If it's going to be, it's up to me, say that and run. So I just want to say real quick, we had a great training yesterday for the state chapter leaders. Look for all the training information to be shared on an upcoming episode of Advocacy Lifeline. I've been asked to put it out there so more people can get to it. So you'll have that there. And lastly, I want to just tell you, thank you for being here, the commitment, be the change, go out and do the next best thing and the right thing. And Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your conference. Come see us at our booth. And if any of you like to analyze legislation, we're hiring. Come find me. All right, take care.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.